All right, episode 100. Made it. 6 years. Special guest, special host, Jon Stoehr, former teammate of mine in high school basketball and high school track. Jon is a decorated athlete in that he ran cross country and track at Mars Hill in North Carolina, Division II. He was also a student assistant on the men's basketball program there. He has been involved with athletics probably basically ever since he came out of the womb, doing pretty much everything. Big Bears fan, which we just were actually talking about off air. So it's the only thing we really don't get along on. But, he's been involved in the basketball world for a long time, did a lot of high school stuff. Now the athletic director at Dorman High School down in South Carolina. Spent time at other high schools down in the South Carolina area. Jon, if I'm missing anything, please feel free to introduce yourself. But appreciate you joining me here on Special 100.
I appreciate it, Marcus. I'm excited to be here and join you for episode 100. I told you I did have one last little surprise here. Couldn't let you get away. You got all the Packer stuff in the background. And so I had to bring, Dorman High School, we do have a player that is on the Chicago Bears, Jordan McFadden. And so I got to do this podcast with my Jordan McFadden jersey on so that we've got some Bears representation.
I don't feel as bad as long as you have some type of personal connection to him. If it was some other Bears jersey, I'd feel a little bit worse about it. Is he a rookie or what?
So he went to Clemson and then graduated a handful of years ago. Chargers drafted him, and then Bears picked him up last year. And he was on the practice squad most of the year, got called up late, and then when Ozzie Trapillo tore his patellar tendon in the Packer game in the playoffs, and they reshuffled the offensive line. He got the start in the Rams game and played great. So he's back for year 2 with the Bears this year.
So he's a lock on the 53. There's no way he's getting cut and Green Bay is going to sign him.
I mean, I'm not in Ryan Pohl's head, but he's a lock to me. If I was the GM, it's a lock.
Good PC answer there.
Yeah.
All right, so what are we talking about? I have no idea what we're going to bring to the fold. I shouldn't say that. There's a few things you talked about that you'd bring up. So yeah, I guess I'll let you take it from here.
Yeah, so episode 100, I thought this would be a good opportunity for you, Marcus, to kind of reflect back on this journey and talk a little bit about the podcast. I know you've talked briefly in a few episodes prior about the journey on the podcast, but it was when you started doing this, I thought it was a really neat idea, really innovative, and I thought maybe this could be a good episode. If people wonder what is the Fired Coaches podcast about, this might be a good episode to point them to for you. So we'll grill you a little bit on some of your knowledge from some of the previous episodes and let people get to know Marcus Wiegert a little bit. So let's start with that. So you're not only from a small town, but you are from a small town outside of the small town. Like you were from the smaller town outside the small town. So with that upbringing, like where did your love of sports come from, Marcus?
Yes, I'm from Deerbrook, Wisconsin, originally. If anybody knows where that's at without Googling it, send me a DM. I got some Fired Coaches podcast stickers for you. We'll get that expressed out to you. Love of sports? Great question. I was actually dwelling on something like this the other day. I would go back to my grandfather, my dad's dad, and my grandfather on their side, my mom's dad. They were just classic Badgers, Brewers, Bucks, Packers, and uncles that were into it. So I think like that. My dad's dad, my grandfather, had a ton of sports cards. They lived in northern Wisconsin, Conover, Wisconsin. And going up there, he had multiple closets full of, I'm talking cases and cases and binders full of baseball, basketball, football. So I think like that I just kind of gravitated towards. I was the kid, growing up like many of us who just memorized all the statistics and what college they went to and all that. So like going up there was always a chance to like look through the cards, see what new stuff he got, see how he had it organized. Then he obviously had memorabilia kind of stuff just on the walls from games he went to or whatever. So I think like, and a lot of that stuff, got passed down to me now. So I would say like, that's where that all kind of originated from was kind of from their standpoint and relatives.
And so like you and I we were both big sports nerds growing up. Like you said, we're in the back of sports cards. I remember we'd hang out playing video games. Like we'd play NCAA, but we would never play the actual game. We would just recruit and build our teams and simulate all the games. And same with Madden or the NBA games as well. So like, my dream growing up was never to play in the NBA, was never to even coach in the NBA. I wanted to be an NBA general manager. What were your goals and dreams when you were growing up, and how did that evolve over time?
I think that's the same thing. Like me and you, right? It was like, to most people, they'd be like, well, aren't you going to play the game? Which funny, bought Madden last night. First time I bought a football video game, actually really any video game, but in 20 some years. I went to college thinking I was going to drop out of college because of video games and never really touched them. So, I think like looking back, it's funny because I didn't follow that path, but like, scouting and specifically football to me was always like the interest. And I don't know why I never tried to get an internship at a training camp or something like that in some sort, right? To get your foot in the door, because that was really the passion. I guess, going to college, playing college basketball, like there were those things like AD, like what you're doing, right? Like that's always been an interest. But then playing college basketball and seeing coaching, I think like I just kind of naturally pivoted that way to coaching.
Yeah, and like I should have said, I appreciate you having me on as an athletic director. I didn't know if athletic administrators were banned from being on the Fired Coaches podcast. So
we try to speak. We speak positively of them for the most part. So
I'll start the Hired Coaches podcast. All right. So you go to high school. You're a 3-sport athlete: football, basketball, track and field. What from those experiences? What made each of those unique? Obviously, your passion for basketball and football too. You're much more passionate about that from track. But what kind of experiences did you learn from being a 3-sport athlete and from each of those sports?
I think like, from going through it and just being a year older, track was great with Coach Alfonso because he had been there forever, and just like what he gave back to track. And, track was fun. Again, to me, like obviously I know you loved it, but I really enjoyed it. And always got, kind of frustrated with people when they're like, what do? You run around in a circle. Big, cool deal. Right. And I'm like, well, I don't know. You ever go and watch a 4x4 before, or, some of the events that take place? Like, it's pretty cool. Track was the only sport I ended up actually being all conference in. Honestly, probably the sport I got the most nervous in, obviously it being individual in many ways, but, walking up to that starting line and waiting for that gun to go off. I don't know. I'm getting kind of nervous just even talking about it, because like, just, there's no other feeling that really in my life has replicated that. Basketball was what I was probably most talented at out of the 3 of them, even though I wasn't super talented. But it was just something there that you felt like, I don't know, I can go work out whenever, I can go shoot outside, go shoot in a gym, dribble down to the basement, always get better that way. And football was obviously my love. But being the stature that I still am at 40 years old, it just didn't really work out. And as you know, in Antigo, we didn't really throw the ball. Had we thrown the ball, I think, there were chances, I have told the story to a lot of friends and joke around. It's probably better it worked out the way that I didn't play a lot, because I probably would have been decapitated just based on my size. Like I probably wouldn't have lasted. But, we weren't very good in high school. My junior year, we were 0-9, which was your senior year. When you were in the stands on some of those cold, rainy nights, we were not very good. And then Coach Kevin Grundy came in the next year, and we obviously had a better class, kind of behind us that helped us too. But we went 5-4 that year, regular season, made the playoffs. And, I don't know, it was just something about it that, really enjoyed. So, we had plays put in my senior year. It was funny. I went from, just being a practice guy on the, practice scout team to all of a sudden I'm like making all these catches, and it's kind of like, Wiegert's got some good hands. And all of a sudden I start showing up some of the starters. And so going into our homecoming game against Marshfield, who was one of the top teams in the state, like we put all these pass plays in and actively had me involved. Like these were in for me. And Marshfield had the best run defense in the league. So I'm like, homecoming, I'm like, I haven't played really any meaningful minutes on varsity, played a few games on defense, but, just really didn't have much of a moment, and stood there on the sideline the entire game. And by halftime, we were down 28-0 or 35-0. And basically like, well, we're not going to use these plays, like if we're already kind of getting blown out. And so that was kind of the moment there, and it just kind of went away. And so I just continued to be a scout team guy and whatever. And so I always look back like, well, what if I'd have got on the field and we'd have thrown the ball? And what if I'd actually made a few plays? But then I'm also like, well, there's also the other side of that too, right? Like you make a cool couple of catches and all of a sudden your knee gets taken out. Now there's no basketball, and who knows how that affects your playing career if you get a chance in college. So it was great. Loved it. Again, us having as many high school basketball coaches as we did, over the 4 years, like me having 4 different varsity coaches, and you basically the same, Coach Milkey starting that and then having all that turnover. Like it was a real shitty thing to go through as a player. But probably like as you as an athletic director and me, being involved with athletics as long as I was, like such a good thing, because you saw so many different moving parts, different philosophies, different way things were handled. Where, yeah, would we have taken a conference championship team and a deep playoff run or a state run? Absolutely. But, long-term benefits, I think actually all those things that happened actually probably helped us more long-term in athletics than anything.
I did get to be part of a long state run, deep state run in the playoffs.
I was going to say, I was,
before you came along.
The Bayport win, I was in the student section for that. Yeah, that was, to this day, that's one of the most memorable runs ever that no one really knows about, but it was something to watch.
That might have been like one of the last years before they actually began seeding the playoffs.
For sure. Yeah,
and
I think it was.
We somehow got this route to get a couple winnable games and then have to beat Bayport in Green Bay. Yeah.
Yeah. And then you guys lost to Kaukauna by, it was less than 10, right? I mean, it was a good game.
It was a good game.
Yeah.
It was a close game.
Yeah.
All right. So you graduate high school. What went into that decision to go to Marian and play basketball? Why'd you make that choice? And then take me through your time at Marian.
Yeah, I would say it was kind of a default. Basically, it was like, high school, I was emailing any coach I could find online, right? Any D3 coach in the Midwest, wanted to play, had a burning desire, thought I had something to give. Obviously, when you average 8 points your senior year, you're 3-18. The year before, you're 4-21 or 4-17 or whatever we were. Like, there's not a lot of colleges that are really willing to say, yeah, we'll take this 6 foot, 145 soaking wet point guard, right? So Marian ends up being 2 hours away. They have sport management, literally are the only program that says, hey, we'll take you as an invited walk-on, which basically everybody's a walk-on, but we know that recruiting happens at D3. I'm like 2 hours away from home. Perfect. There's a lot of schools I can't get into because I have an 18 ACT. I'm not really applying myself on the academic side. It's kind of like by default, I had a great campus tour and just was like, hey, I'm in. Like, I can play a part of the basketball team here. There's a chance. Went there and, freshman year, never played. It was like 5 games where you just get in and scrub minutes where you're getting blown out or whatever. Sophomore year, I, just really worked hard in that offseason where, I don't know, confidence in me just ticked up a little bit. Night before our first game, my sophomore year, our starting point guard, does something to his knee. I don't remember if it was meniscus or something. It wasn't torn completely, but he was out like half the year. So I was kind of like the third string point guard. And all of a sudden it's like, well, now I'm going to get minutes, like literally the night before our first game. And so played a lot that year, had moments where I was like, yes, I can do this. Moments where I was like the turnover machine, like I was in high school, where I'd throw a turnover to Cale Coleman at half court and at a pure playoff game and he goes down and flushes it. So some moments you just don't get out of your nightmares. But, in the sophomore year, I actually just really started shooting the ball better. So I kind of transitioned from a point guard to shooting guard, which thank God I shot it better because at the rate I was turning it over, I don't think I was going to see the floor as a point guard. And really shot it well my junior year. I think it was close to 40%. And, and then senior year, I didn't play at all, which was really tough, but we were better. I mean, every year we went from freshman year, sophomore year, junior year, senior year, we kept winning more games. We finished second in the league. So that was a challenging year for me mentally. But at the end, I knew like, I got to stick this out, right? I've invested so much. We're getting better. The teammates that were playing over me were good friends of mine. They were a couple of years younger than me who came in as a strong freshman class and things and ended up being sophomores when I was senior. Again, we got along great, right? Like, looking back, deservedly so. Like they probably deserved it a little bit more than me. And obviously they had more years left than I did. Oh, again, a frustrating moment. Senior day, I didn't play at all. Didn't get any tick on senior day, but we won and beat Aurora for like the first time in program history who had won our league that year and many years prior and after. And so, again, there was moments of highs and lows, but again, that's, I think, what we all want in life, down the road is experiences we can look back on and be like, hey, I was in this situation. Like, obviously not even getting to be trusted for 25 seconds on the court senior day, like not great, right? From my perspective, but we won. But looking back at it, it's like, well, I don't care any team that I would coach, like regardless if there's a guy who plays 4 years, like he's going to get on the floor for 20 seconds, 25 seconds, something like that. But again, just things you go through that it's like, makes you feel one way or the other. Was that right or wrong? I don't know, but you can use it as experience in the future. How many
seniors did you guys have? Did you graduate with? Do you remember?
We had 4. Yes. We technically had 3, but we had a guy who was a year younger who was our age who had another year but was graduating, so we basically had 4.
So it wasn't one of those where it's like, well, we got 6, so we can't start all 5 anyway. Everybody anyways, so we're just not gonna worry about it.
No. And there was again, everybody goes through it. Everybody's got stories on different things, and there are a lot of other things that happened throughout my career. That, again, you just bookmark, you write it down, and it's like, hey, if the situation ever comes up, like, how do you respond to it, right? You've seen it, and there's, right, how many situations people see every year and don't see over a lifetime. But once you see it, it's like, all right, use this in another way, whether it's good or bad, and at least you've experienced it.
Yeah. All right, so you graduate, and you dive headfirst into becoming a college basketball coach. Did you go to Carroll first? Is that correct?
Superior first.
Superior first. Okay, Superior first. So go to Superior, which, you got to understand where I live now in South Carolina. Like anybody going to Superior would just be crazy. I know it is beautiful. I've been there before in the summertime, but
Have you run in the Grandma's Marathon there?
I've done Grandma's twice. My half marathon personal best is at Grandma's, and then I did the marathon once too. So,
Okay.
So just let's talk us through your college basketball coaching journey at the Division III level.
Yeah. I mean, Superior was, graduating in 08, housing collapse, like a lot of jobs. I applied for everything. I mean, sports information because I did some stuff in college, admissions because an admissions ambassador, equipment job, right? You're just applying for anything and everything. And I just remember the amount of lack of responses on things. And, going into my senior year of college, I was like, did an internship with the Timber Rattlers, now the high A baseball team of the Milwaukee Brewers. At that time, I was with the Mariners. And I knew I wanted to get into coaching. So I was emailing. I still have emails saved from Scott Drew, your guy, Scott Drew. Yeah. Whether it was from Scott Drew or somebody who was managing his email, I still have the email saved saying, hey, we don't have any graduate assistants. So, just messaging out to everybody, but I didn't really have any true idea. I think I had a small phone interview, if I'm not mistaken, with Bemidji State and Matt Bowen, who was there at the time, and it just didn't work out, which was fine. But then I got connected to Coach Dave Buchanan, who was at Superior, who had been, I think he just finished his second or third year, and got connected with him. I was on With Sports at the time and following, obviously, the college basketball scene pretty closely, being involved in it as a player. And I was like, why is Superior turning the corner? Like, they've been down for so long. Like you had mentioned, right? Like, everyone thinks of Superior, they think of snow and cold. And, all of a sudden, like, they just went and had a deep WIAC tournament run, lost an OT in the semifinals to Whitewater. And they had all these freshmen, right? They had Jake Smith from Rylander, they had Dan Cooley from Rice Lake, Shane Manor from Altoona, Greg Rader from Mercer, all these guys that, most of them had Division II partials. And I'm like, they all went to Superior. And so when I got up there, I mean, between that year and then going to Carroll, because Coach Buchanan was at Carroll then too, looking back, by far the two best years somebody could have had. And don't get me wrong, there were challenging times, right? Like, there were times I disagreed with Coach Buchanan, thought I had all the answers at 22, 23, and he would tell me I didn't. And, shout out to Coach Buchanan being the first one on the podcast here. But it was a great experience because he marketed everything like it was Division I at the Division III level in terms of everything we did, from marketing, fundraising, recruiting, player development. We played Winona State, we played UMD, we went on a trip down to Phoenix, just everything we did. When we were at Carroll, we went on to Daytona, and everything just felt like Division I. And, I know Coach Buchanan ended up being Division I years later at Drake, and he told me that, looking back at Superior and Carroll, we got more things done as a staff of 4 and 5 than sometimes the Division I level, because there's all these people, but just because you have all these people doesn't mean you're maximizing and getting everything done efficiently, So, we ran steak fries where we had 200 people in attendance, and obviously we reached out to all these different fundraising outfits to get, raffle items and silent auction stuff, and, recruiting. We practiced every day it was 6 a.m. Every day at 6 a.m. in Superior that year I was there, because the closest recruiting places were the Twin Cities and Eau Claire for recruiting hotbeds, so we could open up at night. So I remember, obviously going through the day, getting in the car in the afternoon, going to a game that night, and sometimes being so dog tired, sleeping at rest stops on the way back, trying to grab a snooze for 45 minutes. And how I never got lost, that was MapQuest. It was before Google Maps. I don't know. I remember hitting a patch of ice one time, spinning out, nearly hitting some vehicles, and I'm just like, what am I doing with my life? Like, I don't even know where the hell I'm going. But it was just such a great experience those first 2 years, which then carried me into Marian, going back there, helping build something over 8 years, having a NCAA tournament experience where we played Point and nearly beat Point, lost by 2 in 2014 with a 3 at the buzzer that went off, and finished up a few years at Lakeland part-time. It's just like 12 years at 4 different institutions. Never really left Wisconsin, but you got to see so many different areas in terms of Minnesota and Illinois and Indiana for recruiting, and Wisconsin high school games, and just different moments that, I don't know, really enjoyed my experience over 12 years.
All right. So you were at Marian, you go back to Marian for quite a while. You were there for what, probably eight years or so.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, you did everything at the school. I mean, you worked admissions, you were a tennis coach, you were a basketball coach, you were a recruiter, and
coached first base in a softball game. I also was a mascot. I did hockey stats. I was a hockey goal judge. I mean, yeah, there were. Go ahead.
Did you guys have a hockey team?
We did. Yeah.
Okay.
Yep. So I have a picture the day that I left. I wrote on a whiteboard everything I had done between being a 4-year undergrad and then 8 years working there. And there's 30 different things written down, like mascot, hockey goal judge, soccer announcer, baseball announcer, all the stuff.
So you do all of that, and then the job that you desire comes available. And I mean, this is at this point, this is your dream. I mean, this is probably
this is coaching the Badgers.
yes, the coach Marian or the coach of the Badgers, and you are in position. And we talked a lot through that process. I remember, Marcus, and it doesn't go your way. And so what were your emotions coming out of that, and how did that change, your perspective on your career moving forward?
Yeah, well, you're right. Like I said, that was my coaching the Badgers moment, right? Like, this is, in my mind, it's like I'm staying here forever, kind of like Coach Boyle did for 30 years. And I remember when it opened and we were out end of the year, kind of just having some beers and having some appetizers at a bar, and classic Coach Boyle fashion, I'm retiring. And, me and Grant had been there, had played underneath him, was older than I was, and had been a coach as well too. So Grant and I have known each other for forever. And we both, I remember Grant, like your eyes just kind of pop out like the cartoon thing. And so you go through that process, right? Putting everything together, going through the phone interview. I did 3 days, actually, was the only candidate out of the 6 on campus that had to do 3 days of interviews because we had the classic April Wisconsin snowstorm that shifted things around. I was supposed to be the last candidate, ended up being a middle candidate, had to do over 3 days because there were different schedules involved that people were missing. And honestly, for a guy that probably didn't have a lot of confidence in what he was doing, because I think in coaching, a lot of coaches can relate, right? There's some that are like uberly confident. They think they have every single answer, but they're probably missing some things in their blind spots. And then you have the other coach who is like, kind of fake it till you make it, but is super scared. Like, I don't know what the hell I'm doing. I think I'm doing this right. Kind of that imposter syndrome, which I think there's probably more out there than anything. And going through the interview process over those 3 days, I was like, just so confident because I felt like, again, playing there, like you mentioned, working there, seeing things go up. And we didn't finish as high as we did after those first 4 years when I got there. But again, like having an NCAA tournament experience, being heavily involved in recruiting and knowing specifically everything that needed to be fixed in that program. Like there were some things culture-wise, like there were guys that just need to be told like, hey, we got to, kind of straighten up here, or we got to go a different direction, and just bringing guys together more. And so when you get that news of you're second place, you're the runner-up, it's kind of like, what do you do? Honestly, we had a registration for the following year for students. So those kids that are soon to be freshmen coming into campus, the decision was supposed to be made the Friday before. I make a call to the AD. It's like 4:30 because he said we'd hear by the end of the week. Voicemail. And when it gets to 5 o'clock and you get a voicemail and you don't get that call back when you said you're supposed to, you're kind of like, yep, I don't think I'm the one. And so the following day, our president at the time had basically told me, you didn't get the job. And Mark Miller, Wisconsin Yearbook, had already tweeted it out that it was out there. And I'll never forget it. Like the only day in my life where life just, you were going, but there was nothing that you could focus on, right? And so everyone's like, oh, you should stay here. You should help out. You should be involved. Like, new head coach is going to need a lot of help and all that stuff. And in that moment, I had told everybody in the process, like, if I don't get the job, I'm gone. Like, this is kind of the end goal here. And if it doesn't work out, that's fine. But like, I'm gone. And then enough people had kind of got to me like, no, stay around. It'll be a good thing. It'll be a good thing. It'll be a good thing. And, you kind of sniff around to a few other openings. And it's like, well, my family and I weren't moving. I could go down a rabbit hole on the different family things we had with, a niece that I was kind of helping my sister-in-law raise in some ways, being a father figure because she didn't have a father. And my mother-in-law had cancer and she had passed and she had been with us and she stayed with us for 4 years. And there's just a lot of things that like people on the outside didn't really know. Like this was kind of my shot, like to stay in full time because everything around the area had kind of opened up and closed in the last few years. And so it was like, at that point, you're just like, well, what do I do? So I'm like, all right, I'll just stay because I have nothing else. And honestly, the goal was like, I'm going to be all in here. I'm going to stay. Like, let's build this, right? And then there was just some things over the summer that I just, I'll never forget it. It was a conversation I had with a former player. I was driving down Johnson Street, which is kind of the main drive in Fond du Lac. And he had asked me, how are things going? How are things going? I told him, good, things are blah, blah, blah. And he just told me, he's like, you don't sound like yourself. And I'm like, what do you mean? I'm like, I'm fine. And he's like, no, you don't sound right. I'll never forget that conversation. And that was kind of the first time that I was really like, am I doing this, or am I just putting this whole like, thing on? And, timing wise of me leaving, I'll be honest with you, it was not great, but it was in my mind that I knew that it had to be a separation for everybody involved. It was the best, because it wasn't good for me staying there. It wouldn't have been good for the program. And so, there happens to be an opening summer baseball team that I worked with the Timber Rattlers in college. Well, a team they owned in Fond du Lac, we had actually hosted players. Summer baseball team where these Division I kids go to get scouted had an opening. And obviously my management or sport management degree was there to be used. It was a natural transition because I knew the people there. I knew the program. And yeah, leaving in October, 4 days before season starts, obviously wasn't good. But again, I felt like I'm making the best decision for everybody involved, even though everybody looking at that situation on the outside is probably like, I don't know if that guy should have left then. That's kind of like leaving somebody high and dry. And, it's just one of those things. But I would say probably the toughest thing that came out of that was I held to the utmost respect of not reaching out or not talking to any of those players. And I had players during that season text me. I'm in town, right? Like, I'm not coaching. Like, text me about things. And I didn't text back. And if I did, I was like, you got to talk with your coach. I wanted to give nothing of like, I know, which was tough, right? You recruited some of these guys, like, one of them happened to be a player that his teammate or his uncle, was my teammate, my roommate in college. And, you've known this kid since he was in grade school, and you're literally just like halting the relationship because you don't want to like provide any bad juju or mismessaging of the program you're not involved with. So that was probably the toughest thing, where it's like, I don't feel like I'm doing right here, but I know that this is how this is supposed to be, right? Like, here's a relationship, and I think those relationships are fine now with those players. But, at the time it was kind of like, well, this guy's just leaving us, right? Like, he told us to stay here and now he's not talking to us. But it's like, well, I'm just trying to do the right thing from a coaching standpoint.
What is your relationship with Marian like now, present day?
I would say it's non-existent. Yeah, it just, there's a lot of things that over time, after looking back, and this isn't just a Marian thing, I would say this is, in my opinion, and this is not a Division I type thing, but a small college, I've seen a lot of change at small colleges. Enrollments are dropping right across. High school graduation rates are, just because enrollment's down, tougher to recruit, all that stuff. And the amount of change that you've seen in higher ed, I see so many people come in, and we've talked about this on podcasts with guests before. Like, this has been something we've talked on, where a new president comes in, and a lot of times they scrap all the VPs, or over time, they're like, this is how we're going to do it. This is how we're going to do it, right? VPs leave. They bring in their new team. And you get to a point where that happens 1 or 2 or 3 times over. And the amount of people that underneath that org chart that have left, the resemblance of those small institutions that made it so homey and comfortable and community-based are non-existent. And now you have no clue how things were done in the past that worked or didn't work, because now you're just doing it the way you want to. And that might have been tried 2 or 3 times, but because you got rid of all those people, you have no clue how that works and how it doesn't work. And so, I just, the community there is very different from when I was there. When I went to school there from 04 to even it was probably changing in the later years I was there till 16, 17. But, again, the turnover of just staff and faculty and things like that. So there's not a lot. I mean, there's a few people I talk to. I shouldn't say it's non-existent completely. There's, some staff members and faculty. But at the rate it was from when I came back to the coach, and even those first few years after, it was like you knew everybody, to where now it's like, I don't know. I mean, really the people I worked with, there's a handful. 10 that I actually physically knew. So it's pretty non-existent.
Yeah. All right. So how does that experience then lead its way into the Fired Coaches podcast? How does that start building this?
Yeah. So that's, honestly, I don't remember when it was. It was sometime probably that summer of 18, when I was like, after you get through the depression and gloom and feel sorry for yourself, it was in that moment where it was like, hey, obviously this happens in business, it happens in coaching, it happens in everywhere, where people are let go, or they don't get the role they wanted, or, feel they deserve whatever it is, right? Everyone's got their own story. And so I'm like, well, why don't people reach out to fired coaches? Like, everyone wants to interview Coach K and Coach Saban and Coach Belichick. Well, it's like, well, Coach Saban was fired. Coach Belichick's been fired. Coach Hurley's been fired. Coach May's been fired. I just read a book, just finishing it on Kelly Sheffield with Wisconsin women's volleyball. He was fired as an assistant years ago. Like the amount of people that were fired that you would, it'd be fun to kind of put a little app together and be like, has this person been fired? Most people would say Kelly Sheffield, Wisconsin volleyball, national title. Like, no, he's never been fired. Like, it's just amazing when you look at people's backgrounds. And, so it was kind of like, that's where the idea came from in 18, but didn't really obviously happen until 2020 with COVID, when every podcast in the world had started. And it was just like taking some time where it's like, I know you've been the same way. I've been the same way for years, where you see people go create something, whether it has value or not, and you're like, damn, I could have thought of that. Like I had that idea years ago. This was the first thing I always say, like, that I actually feel like I had the first idea. Have podcasts had fired coaches on? Yes. There's not one in the space that it's like, hey, let's actively, interview people who, resigned, didn't have a contract renewed, were fired, whatever. So that's where it all kind of started.
And when you started it, what were your goals, and like how has that kind of evolved over time with the podcast?
That's a great question. I would say at first I had no goals. Honestly, it was like, let's just start this. I remember doing the first recording and troubles with it. Again, Dave Buchanan, which I coached under at Superior and Carroll, was on, again, you're doing your first episode and you already have audio issues. And you're like, okay, you're such an amateur. Like, figure it out, dude. And then, you're going through it and I'm like, well, if 10 people could listen, right, that'd be great. And I think like the first time, Coach Buchanan's on, it probably had like 50 to 75 people, because I started realizing like, oh, I'm going to start with my Division III connections and other people know these people. And what I found is interesting is having so many people on, you actually really don't know them. You get them on a podcast, and I'm sure me and you could do the same thing. And I could pry into your background and your love for Valparaiso and Indiana and all that kind of stuff. And like, all of a sudden you start learning things. You're like, I've known this guy since I was in 6th grade, and I've just learned so much about him. And that's what I found with the podcast is interesting. So like, doing that, again, I was like, if a few people would listen, family, friends, my wife's listened to 2. I got to throw this in there. I told you it was, but she's listened to 2 episodes, Katie Pate and Terry Mitchell. Terry Mitchell was a women's basketball coach at Marquette for a long time. And Katie Pate was the head coach at Coker, actually coached my wife, recruited her down there. Katie was from Wisconsin, had her on. She's now at App State doing fundraising things. I'm definitely going to get back to App State to connect with her. But like, that's the only 2 that my wife's listened to. So it's like, to me, it's like, well, I don't know. The goal is still, if my wife finally starts listening, maybe I've actually finally made it. But, over time, I would say it's changed in just that. In some ways, I wish it was like when it first started. Now I feel like, not that I owe it or whatever, but there's people, again, there's 150 to 200 people that listen per episode from what I can track right now, which is great, right? That's awesome. But like I was talking to some people the other day, and I actually put this in the newsletter, is we always want more, right? Like you always want more. When I had 50 and I was like, oh, if 10 people listen, it'll be cool. Well, 50, you're like, well, if I could just get to 100, it's no different than coaching, right? I'll be happy if I just win the next game. You win the next game and it's like, well, no, now we can win 2 in a row. We wouldn't win 2 in a row. It's just always, and it's playoffs and it's this, and then recruiting, it's like the next recruit. You're never just like, can I just be happy and just content? Like, I know there's always part of growing and goals and things like that, but sometimes it's like, I'll keep doing the pod as long as people are listening. And, the amount of people that have reached out this summer, being 4 months unemployed and kind of doubling down on this has been fun, in that you just have random people reach out and that are like, hey, I just got fired from this JUCO job or this job or whatever, and I'd never been fired before. I didn't know how to react, but just listening to some of your guests talk about what they went through, it was similar level, similar sport, similar school. Like, now I can actually better relate. I would say I'm trying to throw the goals out of the window, but that number is always like, you're always checking, right? And it's like, why? Like, what's it matter? Like, just throw it out there, and if people listen, they listen.
I'm a big, like, no goals kind of guy, so I love that. I just do things the right way.
So what is your philosophy then with no goals? Like, where does that all come from?
I don't know where it comes from, but it
like,
just,
is it like Joshua Metcalf, like bring? Is he the one that bring your goals? No, not bring your goals. There's somebody who wrote about bring your goals.
I'm also a big don't read books guy, so I try have life experiences and try to figure it out from there. And it's funny, anytime I do read a book, then I start, preaching to everybody else about this book that I'm reading. But no, I just kind of introspectively kind of found like that anytime I would have goals, like it put too much pressure on myself, and you start taking shortcuts and stuff. And And ultimately I was like, and there's so many dynamics that you can't control in a lot of goals. Like if you want to win, if you're a high school basketball coach and you want to win 20 games, well, you can't control that, 6 teams in your schedule all got move-ins from that are 5 stars and like you can't, those are things you can't control. You can't control the ref makes a bad call late and costs you a game. So focus more on the process and doing things the right way. Over time, I think your results will happen. But if you just focus too much on that end result and not as much on that process, that's where I think you get tripped up, and it's easy to get discouraged and quit then. And so, I put that question in there, but that's a cool way to answer
I like
it.
that. I mean, do you believe like in some ways, like you said, the process obviously, but do you believe in like mile markers or something where you're trying to not like it's a set, like you said, 20 wins, right? Like again, it's like we're playing Madden or NCAA football again, right? Like you're going to get fired in this game if you don't win X amount of games. Like I agree. That's kind of crazy. But in some ways, do you believe like in mile markers where it's like, again, like if your team GPA, you come in, you're a coach and it's 2.5, like, well, if we're making a GPA jump to 2.7 to 3.2, like that would be really good. Or, like, is there anything like that you believe in?
I do, yeah. So like, and going back to like my junior year of high school playing for Paul Johnson basketball, and like every game we had to write down specific goals, and like you couldn't just put, I'm going to play hard tonight. Like it had to be something that was measurable. And so I do set those, I do believe in setting some barometers like that, some little check marks along the way that are measurable. And anytime someone, if they want to have goals, I'm big on making them measurable. But at the same time, like just don't get too consumed with them. They're good barometers.
It's not black and white kind of thing.
Yeah, and plus, like I'm a competitor by nature, so I don't necessarily need to give myself more motivation to try to win or be the best at something. I mean, like, my mission statement at our school is to provide a student athlete experience that is unmatched by anyone else in the state. And so, like I'm competitive by nature. So anytime I see another school have a great idea and do something, like it's going to get under my skin that like, why don't we do that first? So, that's
just because this is a podcast. No, I love it. Just because I'm a podcast host, and I'm going to flip this on you because I like what you're saying here. Yeah. So with ideas, again, this is run across multiple times where I'll see even on Twitter, like maybe it's a social team in Division I football that does something and everybody else tries following it. Or again, like, in different places I've worked in, we were kind of I would say above and beyond, like the new trendsetters in something. And you would see companies that were like rivals to us try to let and follow. What do you believe in that? Like if there's a good idea that's been done, and you like it, are you going to go do it? Or is it one of those things that you're just going to kind of let it rest and you want to be kind of that first one to it as opposed to following somebody up with something?
I need to pivot to something else. Like I can't move to something and I can't give credence to what you just did. If it's a rival of ours and they do something that's really cool, I'm not going to acknowledge that it was cool. Yeah, in my head, I'll be like, that's pretty cool. But I'm going to try to come up with something different and some other way to try to set us apart and move us forward and kind of shine our light on us. But now, if I see somebody in Wisconsin do something, and that's kind of what's neat with my background is I've been in a lot of different places, so I still see stuff in other areas. So if I see someone far away do something, then I'm more likely to jump on board that and try to get on that train. But if it's one of our rivals, I'm gonna try to pivot and come up with something that's gonna try to top that and help us stand out more. All right, so when did you realize with the podcast like you had something? Like for me, honestly, listening, like when you came with the idea,
and you said before you said you'd listen to probably half of them, at least like 5 minutes.
Listen to about half the episodes. It's not like I've listened to all 99, but especially those early ones, because there's a while that like you'd put a clump out and then you'd kind of go quiet for a little while. Then you'd throw a clump out and you go quiet for a little while. So I always had time to catch up. Now you're pumping them out real fast and I'm having trouble staying on top of it. But I thought right from the get-go, I was like, man, this is great. I hope he stays with us because I think it's a great idea. Was that something right away you thought, or was it like a few episodes in or 50 episodes in? When did you feel like, man, I really got some?
I would say after the Matt Doherty episode, that was like 15, which is my high school basketball number. You and me know, I mean, you were a Carolina fan too in high school. again, I would say like going back to like 02, 03, 04 and watching those North Carolina teams with Joe Forte and Coda and Peppers and Curry and all those guys. I'm like, you'd have told me like, hey, 20 plus years later, or 20 years later, basically, you're going to sit down and interview this guy in what's called a podcast, being able to connect with him first off, getting him on. And obviously, he had his book going out, but that was like the first time that I felt like I did a good job with the podcast. And probably to this day, the only one that's actually what I struggle with. And my biggest downfall in the podcast is sounding too robotic and going through a coach's career, where that was so much like he gave like a 2-minute dialogue of why he was fired. And then it was just random questions and it was just so natural, free flowing. And after that, having a few other Division I coaches on, Scott Cherry, who was in that 93 North Carolina team, he was on, he got fired at High Point. Sundance Wicks, who's now at Wyoming, who I've gotten to kind of know when he was at Green Bay. Bobby Champagne, who's been the director of operations after being a long-time head coach at North Alabama. He's the director of operations down at Houston with Kelvin Sampson. He was on. And like, so those guys, David Beatty, football coach at Kansas, those guys that were on early that like, I give so much credit to, like jumping on this podcast where I'm like, hey, I'm doing this Fired Coaches podcast. And I didn't really know like what this was truly becoming, but they're like, yeah, I'll be on your podcast. And then I think it was Rob Eson, who's now the head coach of UIC men's basketball. He was fired years ago at UAB. He was an assistant at Stanford. When he was at Stanford, and he was so nice, we had some real technical difficulties. Like my internet like went out and we actually had to record on a Friday night and then like a Saturday morning. He gave time to do that. And he had done like a kind of like a mentorship type thing for young coaches, like graduate assistants. And he was just really kind of grilling me like, where'd you come up with this? And I was like, okay, this guy has like gone above and beyond in the game of basketball to help others. And he's like, and there was a few others that were like, how'd you come up with this? And I was like, well, I wasn't fired, but I, was kind of the runner up for this job and kind of the feeling of not being wanted or second place or whatever. And they're all like, And so the more and more that kind of said that, it was like, maybe there's something there. And then I would say lately, like people just, reaffirming like, hey, this is needed. Like our profession, like there needs to be a way to normalize this. Like most people do get let go if you're in it long enough. Like it's rare to not get let go. And so just having that reaffirmation over time and people questioning it was kind of like, maybe this is something that nobody else is doing.
All right. So I've got kind of some rapid fire questions here on the podcast. Before we get into that, because I'm going to, kind of have you shout out you remember some episodes and stuff like that. But just, I know how appreciative you got to be of all the people that have given up their time and how grateful you are. And so just kind of like tell me about how surreal it must be to be able to talk to all these people and give up their time and their busy schedules to give you a few minutes.
Yeah, it's crazy. Again, going back to like the Matt Doherty thing, like just being able to connect, right? Like Twitter, I think I've connected with one person on Facebook. I haven't been on Facebook in 4 years, deleted it. But David Beatty at Kansas had been let go and there was, they were trying to basically not pay his buyout money and there was, all this legal stuff going on. And when it cleared, I can't remember if it was I think I still had Facebook. And I had just DM'd him on Facebook, which to me was like Twitter and LinkedIn is fine. At least that's how I view it. Twitter and LinkedIn is fine if you're messaging somebody. Facebook, it's kind of like, I don't know, that's a little bit personal. That's just how I feel. But I was like, you know what? I'm just going to shoot my shot because everything I read on that guy from years and years was like how genuine of a guy he was and seemed like, wasn't the snaky salesman. And, he had recruited Mike Evans and Myles Garrett and Kyler Murray and all these guys. And then he responds to me and is like, hey, I'm going to call you tomorrow and we're going to do this podcast. And just salt of the earth. He's now a head high school coach in Texas, back in Texas now. But yeah, people just giving their time, but being open. It just goes back to like how small the world is and how like reach out to people, right? Like, again, I've sent, I don't know how many cold DMs on Twitter, on LinkedIn, been referred to some people through others. That's kind of been rare, but that's happened. Or I've been introduced to somebody through somebody. It's more so been me just reaching out. But again, like, I've had a lot of people say no. A lot of people say no. I'm still in coaching. I don't think I had a coach tell me he was going to do the podcast. He had been a Division I men's basketball assistant a long time, had been fired multiple times. He said he was going to do the podcast. We went to go do it, and he said something came up. I said, no worries. We can pivot. We can move. We can schedule. Tried doing another day. Came up, wasn't going to work, and then tried to do another day, and he basically told me that the optics of being on my podcast didn't look good. And I was like, okay, well, you could have just said no or told me that to begin with, as opposed to like we tried to set up multiple times because, right, like you're trying to do a good job of prepping and diving into people's backgrounds so you can ask good questions. So that's only happened once. Most people, it's just been like, hey, I'd rather not be on it. Or if I get out of coaching, which I get it, right? Fired Coaches is not the ideal podcast to be on. I think it was Scott Wachenheim, who was the head football coach at VMI, and one of my most favorite guests. Like, Scott's great. We're going to have him back on during football season, just talk college football with this current season going on. And Scott was like, I think he mentioned to me maybe off air, he's like, I'm surprised you don't have more followers. And, it's one of those things I'm always too, but I'm also like, this is not the ideal podcast for people to be on, right? Like, to go and I want to go listen to every Fired Coaches podcast. Like, again, you're hitting a real niche, which is what I wanted and what it has to be to do a podcast. But it's not like you get all the top end fired coaches that are like, well, I want to go tell my story to Marcus because that's going to be a good one. He's going to be the counselor for me. Sometimes I felt like a counselor to people and got the weight off their shoulders. But yeah, I put this on Twitter a while back, but a Division III coach I know really well when I first started was like, why don't you change the name? And I'm like, to what? And he's like, well, I don't know. Something doesn't sound so rough. And I'm like, no, like, I'm trying to get a niche. Like, people don't want to be on it. They don't want to be on it. I had a coach, this was like 3 weeks ago. I followed somebody who had been fired and was just going to, try to follow them, see if they follow me back, reach out, DM, hey, you want to jump on? And they blocked me on Twitter. They blocked me. So I don't know if I'm like a boogeyman or something. I got this shirt I'm repping, which you can buy on Sticker Mule. You were fired, you didn't die. So I didn't intend this to be like a let's normalize firing. It was more so to give people a voice. But now I feel like my new mission has been like, hey, let's just normalize it. Again, as long as you're not doing something immorally, like if you're just losing because of record or because, again, we've had so many people on here where, again, AD, presidents change, people want to go in a different direction and that's their decision because they're in charge. Like, it's not a death sentence. So, it's been interesting how it's changed and the thoughts and just people giving the time has been unbelievable. Honestly, I can't say enough. I mean, Peter Vesey had on, which didn't necessarily fit the mold, but, him being an NBA guy, just him jumping on here, Ryan Hawk with his book. I know you're a big book fan. So Ryan's book just came out, AJ Hawk's brother, just all these people just giving their time has been, but again, the internet's small, just reach out. If you got something interesting, people usually give you a little bit of time.
Now, one of the things that blows my mind is like, you have always have such a deep knowledge of all of your guests. Like, what are your research methods when you prepare for an episode?
Yeah, I would say, this is the one world where, Ryan Hawk actually talked about on his episode about how you shouldn't, give AI like your brain, right? Where like you're giving everything to AI to figure out. But I will say this has definitely helped. I would say the guests early on, right, were people I knew to kind of get started, and those were harder because you knew them. So like you're trying to dig into like different questions you've never asked them while you're out recruiting or coaching against them or working with them. But then these people I don't know, right? Yeah, AI does help, especially when you're, let's say you're a guest and you've been on 3 or 4 podcasts, right? I can go into any type of AI and say, hey, can you please summarize and bullet this for me? So I can at least scan through, and if there's some interesting things in there, now I can go open up the podcast, jump in, listen to what they were saying. Articles, obviously, even tweets or things that they put out. So that way it's been a lot easier to kind of research. But that's probably my biggest challenge is because it's also my biggest mental block on why from 2020 to 2021, 2022, and then there being a big gap to 23 and 24 and not really picking up again to 25 is why I didn't really do it. See, had a kid, had job changes, stuff with a lot of family losses and whatever that happened in that time frame. I had this mental block of I don't want to jump on a podcast with somebody unless I can ask them questions that have never been asked before, which is dumb because most of these people on the podcast, if they're on my podcast and someone listens to it, they probably haven't listened to them on other podcasts. But in my mind, if Jon Stoehr has been on my podcast, or going to be on my podcast, I want to ask him questions that no one's ever asked him on the other ones because my mind is my listeners have listened to all those already and they know all those things about, and it's just that way of like, right. It's that challenge of like trying to be the best host you can and ask the best questions you can. It's gotten better, but there's still some, Chris Kreider, I texted him. Chris Kreider, Georgia Tech men's basketball assistant, was on recently. Seems like an absolute salt of the earth guy, like the nicest dude in the world. He had worked for Scott Parra. Scott Parra was on. Scott Parra is a GM at Penn State. And so it's funny how we get those guests that are connected to one another after somebody listens to one. I told Chris afterwards, I'm like, I don't think that was a very good podcast. Like I had done all my research. The flow, I was just off. I don't know what it was. And he's like, no, it was good. And I'm like, I don't, but again, it's just that when you do so many, you start like almost having this internal, not a goal, but just like a standard. So when I got off that podcast, I just felt bad because it was like, felt like I didn't give my best self. And so I guess like in some ways that's kind of like coaching, right? Like you want to go in there and knock it out of the park. Sometimes I'm taking notes on the side and some of these, it's like, what? I'm like, what the fuck did you just say? Like, you didn't even make any sense in that question you asked. But again, just trying to get better every single time. So the flow has gotten a lot better in terms of researching. But again, just the process and trying to be better. And, I always used to say, absolutely, after somebody would answer. Like, I wanted to get a shirt that said Fire Coaches Podcast, absolutely, period. Because I'd say absolutely. Like, stop saying absolutely. Like, you don't need to. Just think of the next question.
That's good. That's great. Yeah, you listen to yourself, you find out what ticks you got, and
now I'm always saying right. Like, I'll say a sentence, I'll say right, like I'm from the UP or Canada, and I had a Division III coach who I know really well. He goes, man, sometimes when you get really excited, he goes, the up north accent in you just comes out.
Man, who was the first guest that you had on that you had no connection to, that it was just reaching out social media? Or
I think it was Scott Cherry.
Scott Cherry?
I think I'd have to look back. Power of the internet here. Let me just look quick. I think it was Scott Cherry, though. So like I said, he played at North Carolina on the 93 championship team, the old Chris Webber timeout. He had been at High Point, got fired. I take that back. He was episode 8. Mike Worrell was on episode 6. And so Mike had been a longtime Division III head coach at Illinois College in the Midwest Conference, same conference as what Carroll and St. Norbert used to be in, Grinnell. And so I had coached against Mike, but I never knew Mike. And so he had started listening because I had Coach Buchanan on. I had some of these coaches he had coached against. And honestly, probably one of my more favorite episodes, in that I feel like the dark cloud went away after he told his story. Like, Mike I'd never really told his story. And he was at Illinois College for like 20 some years. He had been an AD and a coach. He was at Bethany out in West Virginia. Had done a lot of different stuff afterwards. But I remember, and he said it so perfectly, and I've never heard somebody say it. And it's the same thing that I miss within coaching, is he said, I just miss being miserable. And I was like, when he said that, I was like, Mike, I can relate so well, because, it doesn't matter the sport, whether the way you lose, whether the way, whatever, right? I mean, everybody's had heartbreak in some ways. And getting on a bus after you had a 6-point lead with 40 seconds left and you're at a 1-and-1 free throw, and there's a 3 that's hit from half court to send it to overtime, and you lose on a road in a place you hadn't won in years, and you're on that bus and you're like, I wish I could just fall out this door and this thing just run over me right now. Like, the feeling so miserable, like the lows are the lows and the highs are the highs. Like, corporate world, you'd have a good living, right? You can be around your family and make good money and all that stuff. But the highs and lows, like, of athletics, like, you don't get that. So Mike was the first one I had on there. When he said that, I was like, if there was a name I was going to change the podcast to, it'd be like, make me feel miserable or something like that, because that was just the way he said that. I'm like, I feel what you're saying, man.
It's a little bit like Tony Bennett's I need guys I can lose with first. What do you think, and I have not done the math on this, what would you say your ratio of basketball guests versus non-basketball guests would be through 99?
Yeah, I would say 5% to 88% probably basketball. Actually, probably closer to 90% basketball. So I've been really trying to get more into the football world. But again, there's so many. It'd be fun to get into softball and these other things as well too. But yeah, basketball's kind of been the dominant.
All right, I thought of this while I was listening to episode 99. That was the one that just posted. It was
Zach Brannon.
And he's a performance mental health type coach, correct? And so who's the guest where you felt kind of out of your league, like, man, I don't know this topic that I'm going to be asking these questions about, and just kind of crossing your fingers and hoping that you hit the right questions?
Man, that's good. I don't know if I have an answer for that. I don't know if I have a guest that I didn't feel comfortable. That's the one thing not to be prideful or anything, but I do feel like I have a pretty good handle on different things in different areas. As much as I would say maybe NFL scouting, because as much as I love that, like, that's still kind of a foreign area in some ways of like the nitty gritty. Like, it's a passion of mine. I love it. I read a ton on it, but it's still like, I don't have a clue what their world's like. Like, Ronnie McGill was just on, who played football at North Carolina, was an NFL scout for the Patriots. He was the episode before Zach Brannon in 98. And he talked about, like, working 21-hour days for Belichick in New England and what that lifestyle was like. And it's like, I know working hard in sports, I know football to a degree. I can't even put myself in like what that world and what Belichick had. I would say the one I was probably the most nervous was Peter Vesey, because knowing him as a reporter and like trying to be a detailed guy and you have all the facts, that's the only guy I've interviewed that's been like a journalist by trade. And I'll never forget when I first jumped on there, and he said it jokingly, but I took it serious. You can look it up. I have the YouTube video, and I'm like, Peter Vesey, I do his bio, and he's like, thanks for having me. And he's like, you're going to regret it. And he kind of started laughing. And I was like, haha. And I like definitely had a lump in my throat. Like, and I remember when I first started, I was like talking about how he played college basketball, or tried playing college basketball for a year. And then like he corrected me. And I'm like, oh my God, first question. And I'm already getting like check marked here. Like, am I doing this? So, and then, by the end of it, like it went really well. But that was probably the most nervous I was because again, like I just knew as a journalist and like his reputation, like, he's got the interview with Karl Malone after the NBA finals. That's from NBC. That's on YouTube. And he's in Malone's face after Jordan beats him, for the last time. And he's like, Karl, is this like, will this be the memory on your career? I mean, he's just going at him. Right. And like in the moment that like Karl Malone's there, and Malone handles it like a champ. So I was like nervous as hell sitting down with him.
Well, that's a good answer. That makes sense too. I mean, that's you're interviewing someone that interviews people. That makes a lot of sense. Who was the first non-basketball guest?
Lincoln Wynn, who I worked with at Marian. He's a men's hockey coach. He had been at different places coaching hockey, juniors and Division III and all that kind of stuff. So he was in the podcast, which I think the only hockey guest, if I'm not mistaken. I've tried to get a few others, but he was the first one that was non-basketball.
All right. What is one piece of knowledge you've gained from doing these interviews that you continue to carry with you today?
I think the curiosity has just upticked. I always tell people on some of these podcasts, like I would say it's probably 2012, 2013 when I would consider myself like becoming a lifelong learner, like trying to connect the dots and get better and figure out ways. I would say since doing this podcast, I've definitely uptick curiosity, and not just in sports and interviews, but just in life in general. Learning from people, just here and there, again, you think that all these stories will be the same. And in some ways, like hearing that, we've had a few guests that are like, look back at my career and was it worth it? Like I really didn't help raise my kids a lot and I wasn't in their life much. In some ways I look back to mine, like, kind of having my career end abruptly, like I mentioned earlier, due to family and things like that, and kind of having that last shot, because I applied for 4 other Division III jobs prior to that and never got a sniff. So I knew that was like, if I don't get this, it's kind of it. And then again, things transpire, right? Like my father passed, my father-in-law passed, my sister's boyfriend passed, all these different things happen since the podcast had started. And you're like, actually being out of coaching, like I actually got time to be around these people. Like I got more time to go to weddings and hang out with friends and all this stuff. And it's like, would I die to be back in and doing everything? Yeah, 100%. But it's like, I have a kid now that never knew I was a coach. Like Sheila looks at me and is like, Dad, what did you coach? Like, I don't, so it's kind of like, it's almost like 2 different worlds. And, I'm fine with that. Like at some point you have to like decide one way or the other. And it's like, well, now that you have family and time on your hands and a chance to sit down with legendary athletic directors, like, if I'm busy coaching, I'm probably not doing this right now.
All right. You talked about the one, was it with Kreider, that you'd maybe like to have a redo? What would be the interview that, like, there was much more there, you kind of ran out of time, or you finished everything on that topic, but man, you'd love to circle back with that guest and sit down and just keep the conversation going?
Probably Ryan Hawk, and obviously he wasn't a coach, but his career, the reason, and this is why I want to circle back, because we never even talked about it. He's written now 4 books, and I followed his newsletter and his podcast for a long time. But the reason I want him on is he wasn't fired, but when he was the quarterback at Miami of Ohio, he got replaced by Ben Roethlisberger. And so we talked about being this, quarterback that had a lot of success in high school, going to Miami of Ohio, and then Big Ben comes in and beats him out. And I read online somewhere that, Ryan Hawk had talked about, you can do everything within your power, but sometimes it's not enough. Like sometimes you literally just, it's not good enough. And then he transferred and finished his career playing at Ohio. And, I never talked to him about that. And that's actually the reason I want him on, because he wasn't fired, but like in some ways it's kind of that same feeling of like you're being replaced, right? Like, and there's just so many more things with obviously the guests that he's had on, and he sat down with PJ Fleck and Clark Leah at Vanderbilt recently and all these different people. But from coaching perspectives, there's just some when you get into a flow and you're like, damn, like honestly, I could sit down and talk with this person more and more and more. And Scott Wachenheim, like I mentioned, who was the head coach of football at VMI, had been an assistant at Air Force in Arkansas and Colorado and the Washington Redskins, now Commanders. And then Rick Petrie, who was a women's basketball coach, was the head of women's basketball coach at South Alabama and Jacksonville State, just retired from Jacksonville State. Like those guys retiring recently and just seeing so many different things. I think it'd be cool to get them both on a podcast together. Seeing things at the Division I level as long as they did and evolution of things, I think it'd be really fun to sit down because there's just so many more questions and things that you can go into. And that's the thing with these podcasts is you try to keep it to 30 minutes to an hour, but you can just go for days. There's just so many different branches you can jump onto.
Who's been the funniest guest you've had?
Oh, I don't know. This is probably the most fun I've had. You, I mean, it's actually going to let down my guard a little bit. Honestly, I'm going to give it to you because it's just like, obviously we've known each other for so long and it feels like there's just natural jabs where sometimes you get into a flow with somebody where you can meet them and you can joke about some stuff, but it's kind of like, sometimes you throw an out there and you're like, I don't know if this is going to land. And if it doesn't, you're like, don't do it again.
It is like, you and I will talk, we'll text for a while and then like we won't say anything to each other it'll be a couple months and then all of a sudden we will pick right back up wherever we left off.
But that's the best part of life. Like that's where like I love that with people where it's like, again, I think that's like a true relationship there, but that is like the best part, right? Like it's like the Tiger Woods meme with the big dog. There's nothing better than just seeing somebody or connecting with somebody that you haven't talked to in months or years. And it's like, oh my God, I feel like we're back 15, 20 years ago.
And we still have not gotten the Marcus Wiegert on the podcast that is like 14 texts in a row. Like we haven't gotten that guy yet. Like you've not where you get fired up and passionate and just let it rip. We haven't had that guy as a podcast host quite yet.
Speaking of, the only time in my basketball playing career I got a technical you were the head coach of, and that was the only game that you were the head coach of. So I think that maybe that's a you problem, not a me problem.
That's right. I bring out the worst in you, Marcus. All right. You kind of mentioned it. I mean, maybe Vesey, maybe Doherty, but what interview are you the most proud of? Or maybe it's a different one. What interview are you the most proud of? You got done with it and you're like, man, I nailed it. Even if it wasn't like the big time guest, but you felt like everything, you hit all the boxes, you checked them all, and we're just proud of where it went.
There's a lot that I keep coming back to that are kind of the same, but the Terry Mitchell one I thought was really good. Her being the women's basketball coach at Marquette for a long time. She was an assistant at Marquette. She was assistant at Pitt. She was one that like talked to her on the phone a week or a day prior, something like that. And you just got on and you felt like you knew her as long as I've known you. Like the more it went, like there was just this, cohesion. And I could say that with a lot of other people too. Scott Parra, like I mentioned, who was a head coach at Rice and assistant at Arizona State, and now he's at Penn State as a GM. And there's just some people you get on and there's such a natural like connection to and flow. And yeah, there's so many. And I feel bad even mentioning some people's names because there's just so many on here that are like, it's funny because I'll text a select few people or people that I think that podcast will relate to afterwards if it's like really good, like, hey, next week I'm gonna have this, and and kind of give them a heads up, or if it gets released. And usually it's those ones where it's like, I'm obviously, if I don't do a very good job, it's kind of hard for me to promote it unless the person's really good, like Chris Kreider was. But there's some where it's just like, man, that was really good. And again, those are probably the ones too where you're like, I wish I had another 45 minutes to an hour with that person, like, but I'm not Joe Rogan, so I can't make it happen.
We have gone long, so if you need to, this might be a two-parter. What episode did you learn the most? You find yourself just kind of sitting back and you're just taking notes. And I'm sure there's a couple. Anytime that I'm listening to your interviews with these guys, like there's about 2 or 3 gems that it doesn't matter which person you pick. Like it could even be a poor guest, but like everybody's got a story and everybody's got some gem that you can pull out of it. So were there any where you were just sitting back like, man, I've not heard that before. I've not heard that perspective before. And it just really hit home with you.
Yeah, I would say, there's some that I'm trying to think back to. The overriding theme I would say is that the realization that some have said about it not being so bad being fired, right? Like Brian White, who was the offensive coordinator, running backs coach at Wisconsin. We were growing up, like Ron Dane. And he had a book come out recently. He's at Bowling Green now as a advisor or an analyst, with Eddie George. And, he had been at Notre Dame, at Washington, at Syracuse, Florida, if I didn't say that, all these different places. And he's been let go so many times, and like he's just resilient. And he just seems like such a good guy. And, it's just like the fact that, hey, like he's kind of the prime example of like, just keep going. right? Like just keep fighting, like you're going to figure it out. I had Darren Savino on recently, who was the associate head coach at UCLA men's basketball. He's been with Mick Cronin at UCLA and Cincinnati. And, he was a guy who's a D3 guy, played for Bob Hurley Sr. at St. Anthony's, but he coached high school ball and he had some players, but like he just grinded his way in Division I and just stayed in it. And he was fired on staffs multiple times with Fran Fischilla and Joe Dooley and at Rutgers, he was on a staff that got fired there too. And it's kind of just, it's not that you're learning anything crazy. Again, when Mike Worrell said, me feeling miserable, like, I miss that. Like that was kind of a cliche of like, oh, I can definitely relate to that. Hugh Hernesman actually maybe was the one that he was a volleyball coach that we had on. And he had said how it was an earlier episode about how the losing at the program he went to, I can't remember which school, but he said the losing had been there so long, like the losing was in the walls. And just the way he said that, I was like, oh my gosh, like that's so good. That it had just been there for so long where the program had been so down. And obviously the players, they were, relate on their work ethic where they just assume they're walking in, they're going to lose. And so there's not a lot of things like that where it comes out where it's something you haven't heard, but just the ways that, people maybe surprise you sometimes where you feel like, they're going to go one way or the other here, where it's going to be like, oh, they're going to be really down on something or really whatever. And they kind of just, their mindset kind of changes things a little bit. Or even people that were fired and realize that, hey, now that I've been out of it, I have seen family members, I have seen this, I've done this, I started this business or whatever. And actually life's pretty good. So more so that stuff has kind of been, I guess, surprising or interesting to me than anything else.
If someone came to you with asking for your career advice and they're trying to decide between pursuing podcasting or a college basketball coaching career, what kind of advice would you give them?
Well, I'm a big proponent in that everybody should have a pod or a blog. Not that it's got to be like the blog's got to be for, public use or anything like that, or a journal or whatever you want to call it, right? Like just putting down your thoughts. I would love to write a book. I don't know if anybody's going to read it since my wife won't even listen to the podcast, but I think it'd be fun, right? I think everybody's got their own story and it just hits people in a different way. So I think like that's important. I would definitely say the coaching is the way to go, right? I do think I'll get back into some level of coaching at some point down the road with my kid or whatever. So I would say, that's the best thing, being around young people, whether it's high school kids or college athletes or professionals, right? Whatever. Just those ages where they're turning into different people and they're growing up and bringing a team together and all that. I think there's nothing better than that. And that's where I, really enjoyed, I coached college tennis. Like I knew nothing about it, right? Like you explained the sports. I was in high school. I did not play tennis, knew nothing about it. But there was just something about coaching an individual sports team that you knew nothing about, that you learn so much about yourself and just other people. That was really special. So, I mean, coaching hands down is the best way to go. But if that fails, you can always, join the Fire Coaches podcast. We probably could expand this brand and maybe get like the Field of 68 where they have all these different, reporters in different areas, Fire Coaches podcast. Maybe that's what we need to do, get satellite offices. So if you know anybody down in South Carolina, let me know.
All right. We're wrapping up here. All right. Would you coach?
I should have been more prepared. I actually really enjoy these questions. So maybe you have a future in podcasting.
Appreciate it, man. All right. Would you coach differently, and how would you coach differently? So now you have, like, I was thinking about this while I was cutting grass yesterday and
you're cutting grass and worrying what Bears jersey you're going to wear today.
Thinking about like, what questions can I ask Marcus? Like you've essentially got a master's degree in coaching philosophy here from just doing these podcasts. And so like, how would that change? Would you be a better coach? Would you be a worse coach? How would you coach differently?
I think I wouldn't, this is going to come off wrong. I wouldn't care as much in knowing what I know. Like, okay, get into coaching. Are you talking like I would still have my background in coaching, or just by listening to this is the only experience you have to coaching?
So you're like, you decide to get back in and you pick up as you kick Ivan Flannery out of the Antigo High School basketball job, and you were the head coach at our alma mater, Antigo High School. Are you better now than you would have been when you first left Marian?
I love how we got the Flannery name in there. I'd like to think I'd be better. Again, just life experiences, the older you get, hopefully you're better. Obviously, I would definitely be better because I'd have 99 different guests I could reach out to when things are going very poorly that could talk me off a ledge. So yeah, I would like to think that, going through this, again, I love what you said about the goals thing earlier, right? Like there's a lot of things you can't control within coaching. There's a lot of things you can control. So I think like there's just perspective. And I think like, being out of coaching now, right? Like, yes, I kind of took myself out got back in at Lakeland for a few years part-time. Sam Schrader, shout out, great dude. And then, just really kind of got out for money and lifestyle and all that kind of stuff. But now going back in and realizing what I miss, you're probably like more grateful than what you were when you were in it, right? And you're, again, feeling miserable and you're like, oh my gosh, we're on this 4-game losing streak. I always said it that, and I didn't realize this till I got out. You feel like when you're at a small Division III where there's maybe 300, 350 people, 400 people in the stands on a good night. Sure, if you make the NCAA tournament, you're going to get some thousands. When you're playing at a small college and it's an enrollment-driven school, it's probably 300 to 400. And you feel like there's 400,000 eyes on you when the game doesn't go well, right? And that your information is plastered on Google and everywhere else, and it's on every social site. And it's really not. Like, you're not coaching the Badgers. Nobody's on a message board. No one's on this community forum. No one's on social talking about this. Like, no one cares. Like, right? Like, there is the parents that care. There's the players that care. There might be a handful of alumni that are really invested in your program. At a small Division III, like, there's just not a lot of people that care. And in some ways that's good, some ways that's bad. But now getting out of it, it's like you look at it and you see it and you're like, yeah, it doesn't matter. Yes, don't get me wrong, right? Like, you're not trying to get fired. You're trying to make money. You're trying to grow your program. You're trying to win, trying to get better recruits. But there's also a part of you that's like, don't take this so serious. Like, have fun. And so, like, even looking back, it's like, I would hope that the guys I coached and the females I coached were like, oh my God, great dude, had a lot of fun, a lot of energy. I hope like the second version of me is like being older and you think like more stuffier and whatever. Like, hopefully I'm the same guy, if not a little bit more loose. Like, hey, here's what we're going to do to win. Here's what we're going to do, but we're also going to have fun. And because life's too short and seasons are too short and all this stuff, that we're not going to be like super, super uptight. I would like to think as a coach, if it wasn't basketball, like, you're giving players more freedom, because it's like, I don't know, like, you're the coach, but like at the end of the day, like, let these kids play, like, let them have, like, yes, there should be guidelines and structure and all that kind of stuff, but it's not all about you. Like, you don't have to call every single set down the floor, and let them make mistakes and let them grow and let them figure it out, because at the end of the day, like, you want to have a lot of success. Like, they're going to need to come in clutch moments and think for themselves. So they're not going to be robotic. So I don't know. I'd like to think, down the road, you're smarter. But again, I guess we'll have to come back on a different podcast and decide. Maybe I'll be on my own podcast.
So our volleyball coach, she's won 17 state championships. She's an absolute legend. We're about to name the arena after her, Paula Kirkland. And
by the way, if you have not seen Dorman High School's arena, check it out.
We're very proud of it. We're very prideful here at Dorman. But anytime she talks and gives advice to coaches, she finishes up kind of the same way that you did. She's like, most importantly, have fun. Like, let the kids have fun. Like, this is an escape for them. Make sure that you have fun. Make sure that you are enjoying being out there. And she's been doing it for 45 years. And I got the most difficult job I got right now. I got to make sure we can have her keep going 46, 47, 48. So make sure that she wants to keep on doing this. So
here's a question for you. So on that same topic, and you having the kids now, and obviously your youngest, getting into high school and running and things like that, where do you see yourself from being a coach to now being a parent who also has a lot of coaching knowledge and is an athletic director? Like, do you feel like you're uptight, or do you feel like you understand, like, hey, like, Jameson or whoever else, like, my kids have to have fun, or, like, where do you feel like that's changed in your life?
Boy. So this has changed. My perspective has shifted a lot, and I've certainly would be a better coach now having kids that are of that age. My oldest is going into high school, not my youngest, Marcus. So you said my youngest is going into high school.
Man,
you aged me a little bit there. My oldest is
I meant to say you're old.
My oldest is going into high school. Man, I've got someday we can have a separate discussion. I got some thoughts on youth sports that I would love to have a platform to get off my chest.
If you got a few more minutes, and not to hijack this pod, my thoughts with youth sports, which I've shared many times on here, is that, our kid is, going to be a first grader, and she hasn't been in anything yet. And we honestly don't feel like we're going to put her in anything for a few years yet, just because of the youth sports culture. Like, we don't, and we both were college athletes. We just don't believe in it, like, kind of going against the grain, I guess.
With my oldest though, so he'll be a freshman. He's running cross country. He's running track and field. He will be competitive. He'll be battling for a varsity spot. I was coaching basketball and cross country here at Dorman before I became the athletic director. I have such an immense amount of respect, obviously for both those coaches, but for in this particular situation for the cross country coach. So it's very easy for me as a parent to sit back and have full faith in the coach and everything. And I don't want to say anything in the race, but I've found he has asked me, he's like, when you yell at me, I do better. So now I do, I got
at least like he's telling you that.
But that is his choice. And so when people see me out there as the crazy father yelling at his kid, like that is at his request. Because I'd prefer to just sit back and just kind of watch, but he wants me to yell. And gosh, I mean, all three of my boys are so different, and so each experience is going to be them coming through. It's going to be so different. Our middle one's in second grade. Our youngest is in kindergarten. So, and I've got some good friends that I tell them, like, keep my perspective in check, and coaches too. Like I've told that cross country coach, like, if I become that parent, let me know. Keep me in check, and make sure that I still keep the same perspective when I'm viewing other kids as it is my kids. So I'm trying to keep that perspective, but it is hard, and like it helps me get in the shoes of another parent and to go through what they went through. And it was a good experience. Like Jameson in seventh grade, he got cut from the basketball team, and then in eighth grade he made the team and barely played at all. Was the last guy on the bench. And so it was great perspective for me to be able to feel, all right, these are the emotions that these parents are going to feel. And I don't know, I probably did have a little bit better perspective on it. And it helped. Like cross country is this thing. It's not basketball. So we weren't living and dying with basketball when he didn't get in the game, but he'd come home at night and be frustrated and play. And so, you have those conversations with them, and you help him realize, James, he didn't play basketball for 4 years. Why would you think he'd be, I know you love it now, but these kids have been loving it their whole lives. You got mad at the game because your dad was always gone because of the game, and now you decide you like it. So, but anyways, yeah, we can do I'm telling you, I'll do 2 hours on youth sports with you if you want, Marcus.
I feel that's like a Michael Jordan quote there. Is it the game? Is it my fault? Is it the game? No, but the self-awareness, I love that though too, from your perspective of like, hey, if I'm getting out of line, like, let me know, right? That's what a lot more of this world needs, is self-awareness.
All right. So Marcus, man, you're such a natural podcast host. I just, 100 episodes. Want to congratulate you, man. I'm so proud. I love listening to, like I said, I have not listened to every episode, but like you, it was just amazing to me. Just episode 1, just how natural you stepped in. It was like, this is a great spot for you. And I hope we keep going. I hope this is, before long, we're at episode 1000, but I just want to know, want you to know how proud I am of you, and I'm gonna keep listening and keep on trucking, keep on carrying on, man.
Well, thanks, Jonathan. You, if you ever got an opening for a podcast host virtually at Dorman, I'll have my application in, but you actually do a pretty good job too. So pretty impressed by your questions. I don't know if you threw those into Chat GPT or Grok or Gemini or whatever, but that was pretty good.
I appreciate it, man. As good of a podcast host as you are, you're an even better podcast guest, Marcus.